So 6 years ago, I did my first one-man live show. It was called An Evening of Narcissism, and essentially what it was I rented out a gallery space, put up a bunch of my art, mostly my action figure photography, and then projected onto the wall a collection of short films that I had worked on, and in between each one I did some storytelling segments, kind of like what I do with the Tales of Narcissism videos, but with a live audience. So it was a one-night thing. It was much longer. I think it ran probably too close to 2.5 hours, because part of the show was to show the short films, and then I would show the short films a second or maybe even third time, but on the second and third time I would be doing live commentary over them, talking about how I made the film, or stories behind its inception and the actual production of it and such. So that was the first evening of Narcissism. The theme throughout it was connecting stories of my love life with stories of my creative life through filmmaking. Not long after I finished that one, I came up with a subtitle for doing a second show. I thought of the phrase, "the encore nobody asked for." And that was the primary genesis for me wanting to do this show again. Literally because nobody asked for it, but just because I had an idea for a subtitle and I wanted to use it. So that was like 2019. And then I kind of thought about it for a while, like imagining in my head what a second show would be, how it would be different, what things I would talk about instead, what stuff I would show, etc. And I started to make like a rough draft of what that show would be. And I finished that early 2020, and then started asking around on Facebook if anybody knew of any venues that I could use to do this show, because what I had planned for this show was much bigger and more elaborate than what I had done at the art gallery. So I wanted a real stage. I needed something a bit elevated so people could see the whole thing for everything I had planned. But that was in 2020. So I basically just sort of set that show aside and said, I guess I'll probably never do this, because I also hadn't actually found a venue while I was looking, even before the pandemic happened. I was already at a point where I was like, well, maybe I'm just not going to do this because I can't find the right space for my budget. Fast forward 3 years to 2023, this year, and I acted in a stage play called Taking Out the Fucking Trash at Planet Ant in Hamtramck. By doing that show, I got connections to people who run the venue. Once I had that, I thought, maybe I could do this show after all, if these people will let me, because their space was perfect. I had actually used their space to do the last Trauma Dance Detroit that I had done back in, 2018 or whatever. But I had just lost contact with the people that ran it, so they weren't, I had to just go through the regular email process, and I wasn't getting a response, so I just kind of gave up on it in 2020 when I was originally looking. Anyway, 2023, I know the people now. Contact them, they say, yeah, we can do it. And they give me a date, and I start making the show. I start putting it together and getting everything ready and doing all the video elements. And the last thing I was going to do was to build a giant television set that would act as the centerpiece of the show, and would also be what I projected all of the video elements onto, rather than just like the wall or projector screen. So I saved building that for last because A, it's going to take some money and I don't have much, so I needed to wait until it was a week that I did have a little bit extra, and the timing was that would be the week before my rehearsal, which was also the rehearsal was just a few days before the scheduled show date. Unfortunately, the day before my planned day to purchase construction materials and to build the TV set, we got hit with a big storm here in Michigan, and our house floods. Like, our neighborhood floods, and our house specifically floods, I think, the most, because we seem to be at the lowest point in the floodplain that is our neighborhood. And this was the worst flooding we'd had. Our living room actually had water up over the tops of my feet while I was standing there trying to scoop water with a bucket to get it out of the living room and like try to minimize the damage that I knew there would be. So because of that, I had to then reschedule my show because there was no way I was going to have time to put together the last bits of the show, the biggest bits of the show, and still do my rehearsal and still do the show on time, while also dealing with 2 rooms in my house having been flooded, and the things you have to go through to try and minimize the damage from that and to get it fixed as much as possible. So, unfortunately, I then had to reschedule my show for 2 weeks later. Thankfully, the aunt had just had a different show, like, cancel on that date, and they said, well, we can just slot you in there where this other thing was originally planned. So, in a way, that worked out. Unfortunately, it meant that at the very last minute, I'm rescheduling my show, so nobody... if they don't get that information, then they just think that the show didn't happen or they missed it or whatever. And so, anyway, September 15th of 2023, which was just literally a few days ago, I actually did the show. I got up on a stage in front of a small crowd of people, mostly people that I already knew, but there were a couple of strangers in there. And for an hour and 45 minutes, I talked about myself and showed short clips and films of things that I've worked on. And that was my show. This video is then mostly going to be, well, after this rambling, what you're going to see is the footage that was shot at that show. I had my wife Sarah run my camera to record it. Unfortunately, my camera has this flaw where it shuts off after 12 and a half minutes. Just stops recording. I don't know why. Like, the battery's still fine. If I had it turned on not recording, it would stay on. I don't understand. Anyway, because of that, there are chunks that are missing in the show because it stopped and Sarah had to then hit record again to get it going. Those will be noted by a hard cut and then a clip that says scene missing, and then it will resume where she was able to get it up and running again. Also, after just under an hour, my battery to my camera died. That is probably partly my fault. I thought that the battery I put in was my good battery, and apparently it wasn't. So it shut off before the show was over. So there's about half of it is missing. So you don't get to see that. But you know what? That's on you. If you'd gone to the show, you could have seen it. So that's not my problem. But I would like to at least share with you the chunk that was recorded. So I'm going to do that. I've edited in some of the video clips so you can see stuff a little better than what you see it on there. I think that's all I want to talk about. I'm sorry this didn't have a script. I didn't think it was really necessary. So here is An Evening of Narcissism 2, the encore nobody asked for, the live video.
Sometimes the world looks perfect, nothing to rearrange. Sometimes you just get a feeling like you need some kind of change. What's gonna stand in my way? This flame in my heart, like a long lost friend, gives every dark street a light in the end. Nothing's gonna stop me now.
So you will listen to every damn word I have to say!
We all go a little mad sometimes. Haven't you?
Hello. Welcome once more to An Evening of Narcissism, a show where I talk about myself and how I got here. They say it's best to open any speech with a joke. I don't know any, so we're going to move along. Last time I invited friends and strangers to indulge me in my self-indulgence, I discussed my film work through the lens of my love life. This time I want to focus more on the media that has shaped me and my art. As I've discussed in the past, and probably brought up in conversation at least once, I grew up on a farm and in a very small town, so entertainment options were limited pretty much to what was in or around my home. Like nearly all children of the 80s, one of the most commonly used devices in our house was the TV. We never had cable, except briefly for like 2 years in one specific home, so it was antenna-based TV options for most of my life prior to living on my own. Of course, Saturday morning cartoons and Disney afternoons were a big part of what I watched, but I also loved the stuff my mom watched, such as People's Court or Price is Right during the day, or Access Hollywood and Jeopardy in the early evening. However, primetime sitcoms were my true jam. Alf, Perfect Strangers, Family Ties, Wonder Years, and Cheers, among others, were endlessly entertaining to me. Obviously, there was little in the dialogue that I understood on its intended level, but even as a small child, they all had characters I could watch and wish that I could be or hang out with in real life. Nobody in school understood my Balky impression, but that didn't make me love the character any less. I would watch Cheers and imagine having an after-work hangout bar like that as an adult, and everybody would know my name. And looking back now at the Wonder Years, it seems odd, but watching it then, I would get teary-eyed nostalgic for a time I never experienced just from the opening titles. You can have your Morgan Freeman narration because my memories are in Daniel Stern's voice. But I'm getting off track. The point is I loved TV, especially comedic television, and I enjoyed imitating it at times. Eventually, as happens to all children, I discovered Saturday Night Live. My first exposure was stumbling across an election special episode that my dad had taped a couple of years earlier. This episode introduced me to the Dana Carvey "Read My Lips" George H.W. Bush impression that I unsuccessfully reenacted for my once again indifferent classmates. A bit later, thanks to my cousin who briefly lived with us and was my partner in staying up late on the weekends, I learned that SNL wasn't just a one-time thing. It was still on and making new episodes. I once heard a comedian say that the best version of Saturday Night Live is the one you saw when you were 12 or 13. I'm terrible at remembering my age for when things happened, but I do know that the early to mid-90s SNL certainly made an impression on me. Obviously, this is also true of pop culture in general. Adam Sandler, Will Ferrell, Mike Myers, etc. were all breaking out around this time. And of course, I was into all of that, but what was hands down the best thing on the show at the time to me was Deep Thoughts with Jack Handey. At my last show, I spoke at length regarding my love-hate relationship with a classmate named Luke Henry, and how, when 6th grade rolled around and we were the only 2 male students left, we became default best friends and started several creative projects together. I also mentioned our TV show, which we called The Jack and Steve Handy Show. And that brings me to the point of the past 10 minutes of rambling about television. So, here's some embarrassing footage of preteen me.
Jack Handy Show, yeah, I'm there. And this here is Jack Handy with the Jack and Steve Handy Show.
Yeah! Okay, enough with kid cheering and all that junk. Yes, we are live! Living up on the moon. Going next Tuesday. And we are because we're the ones on the moon. Let's rub it in. That's what we see.
So obviously, this on its own is pretty unwatchable, as it is children making a TV show.
And in a couple minutes, we're going to...
They say that you should let art speak for itself, but when its voice is so shrill, it's not a good idea.
Yes, we are.
Handy around the house. Handy!
It's weird because in my memory, as a child and as an adult, I'm a very quiet, shy person,
No,
and
this is not Jack Handy.
seems to contradict that.
This is Roger Ruggles, and he lives right here in Moonville, which is the capital of Moon. And I'm going to ask him a couple questions, and you got it. So, is it always raining around here? And Jack is in trouble. And the moonshine has moved back in. And here he is back, my lifesaver. Maybe I shouldn't call it like that. We are going to find our next local. We'll be back after this.
This was actually an unscripted series, so.
You're on the moon. The moon is stop laughing, Steve. Okay, now, the moon. Okay, forget the French stuff. Mr. Bobby. Settle down, Robinson. Settle down. Come on, you can have it. I'm gonna tighten the tripod, Steve. Okay, to our first question. Well, let me ask you, have you ever met a Russian? Well, actually, I'm gonna rub it in. Right, Steve? No. Okay, we won't rub it in.
So at one point, Luke suggested to me that maybe he should do the voices while he's behind the camera, and I disagreed.
Well, the aliens are certainly very friendly here on the moon. Steve, why don't you come back? And Ben, make sure you tighten the tripod. Hey, yes, as I was saying, the people at the Milky Way Mars Dollar Factory have given us this lovely Milky Way candy bar. We're nothing
So
but us
during the day, we had filmed part of this, and then my dad took us to the grocery store. So we found some more props,
That's longer.
and it made it longer that way. You're welcome. Feel free to indulge in your notice for the full 4D experience.
I'm here. Yeah, it's the Jack Andy Show. Jack and Steve. Shut up, Steve. Jack and Steve Andy Show. I am Jack, you Steve. No, this of course is not Steve. This is not a footstool either. This is the president of the Moon Mist Pop Company. I'm sure you've all seen that wonderful commercial for Moon Mist.
I still have this one.
And as he was just telling me, Moon Mist is a wonderful pop. They get Moon Mist from moon rocks, as you see back here. Or you may not see, because of our cameraman Steve is working. Yes, I am here. Welcome back. As we were just showing you, those are moon rocks, which is where they extract the Moon Mist. And then
So this was obviously filmed in my bedroom at the time. This was the first house my parents owned, so they said I could design my bedroom however I wanted. We went to the Army Supply Store. For some reason they had wallpaper at this particular Army Supply Store. And I found the moon mural, which we put up, and much to my mother's frustration.
well, that was uncalled for, but for the thing, they gave us this free Moon Mist. And I'm going to taste it. Right before you, audience. Oh, let's cut the commercial break while I drink this, huh? So you don't know.
This is literally the first time I ever drank Moon Mist, so I'm a super picky eater and such, so I didn't actually know if I would like it, and I was trying to delay it.
I'm deadly. Oh, we'll be back after this. What you do, Steve? You forgot to turn your remote on. This has been a cuddly, forward, and Henry production.
I cannot believe that I said my own last name wrong. So originally I was only going to make you guys watch one of these, but rewatching this one, there's a moment where I feel like you can see that Luke is kind of done with my shit. And I think you might notice it too, and I want you to be able to appreciate that. So I've included this second clip.
We're going to bring in one of the really important people around here. And the director of
He is not only the director, he is the lead singer, and
So right about here, I think Luke was wondering how much longer this friendship would last. But we were the only two boys in our class, so we kind of had to be friends.
Hey, here is Mr. Luke.
For this episode, Luke wanted to step up the quality of our show. So that's why he recorded the fake audience, and he had the ideas for the guest and such. And then we sat down to do this, and I probably ruined most of his ideas. So that cut was Luke and I having a discussion, a spirited discussion, about the fact that every time we brought a puppet on, I had it attack him and then throw it off screen. So we pivoted.
Lots of fans here tonight, right? And many viewers on Earth.
And we heard them just a couple minutes ago. And here we are going to have a couple clips from your latest CD.
There's a lot of really stupid and terrible things that are my fault. This is not one of them. This song was all Luke. But I do genuinely believe that this is what we both thought Metallica sounded like, since neither of us were allowed to listen to it.
Yes, that was a wonderful piece, Mr. Gonzalez. Certainly was. Yes. I have learned my
Luke was genuinely worried about copyright, so it's not from Mattel. Just like I kept my hand over the Fago logo on the 2-liter bottle. Thankfully, we've so far avoided any notices or cease and desist.
And there's a blue clock on the wall, or should I say on the crater. And it looks like I have to show today. Right on from the jet is the advantage. But what? Not in the show and complete there. We'll give you a tour to move. So sit back, relax, and enjoy your tour of you. Oh. Wonderful view up here. Over there is some idiot walking on the moon. This little spacecraft. Yeah, that's you guys. Look, Theo, it's you. Hey, Steve, why don't you show me some of the constellations around here? Okay, I'll do it. Right over there would be Constellation Terry, Constellation X. If you would, Steve, come over here. Now, Steve. There goes the Big Dipper. Yeah, dips. Good. Right there, the Little Dipper. It's like, only smaller.
Contact session, huh? Yeah. Alright, let's get a shot of Steve. They don't have much of Steve. Come on, Steve. Here we go. Bye. Wait for the camera. Bye. Goodbye. Beginning production. Well, anyway, today we'll be interviewing some of the locals here in the jungle. And first, the commercial break. I'm pumpkin. Yes, I'm endorsing this new Schwartz product. It's a hat. It's a cool. It's a mind. Yes. Like I'm with my new Rangers and I it's special things to be inside papers. It's mine. I know. Yes, I'm here. Endorsed by all major dentists. Yes, it's one of the most famous therapists on the moon. And now, because of Jack now, you can now have one boy and win the battle for
On an unrelated note, I like music. I know this is a controversial statement, but stay with me. Maybe by the end of this, you will too. If for no other reason than because I don't make any. I've always been interested in music, and yet I've never understood it. The creation of it is basically real-life magic, as far as I can tell. And it's not for a lack of instruction. Music class was part of the curriculum all through elementary school, including mandatory participation in at least 2 school musicals a year. Our music teacher was even someone who was on a local Christian music record label with an album out and everything. My best friend in junior high attempted to teach me guitar once, but gave up after 1 lesson, as in he gave up on me learning, not that I gave up on wanting to learn. In high school, I visited a friend who was the drummer in the only local band that ever existed in my hometown. He told me to try out his drum set. Very quickly, he changed his mind and said I had done the worst drumming he'd ever heard. I dated a girl who was in the high school marching band and once was allowed to play her trombone during a football game, which is not a euphemism. But I only managed to succeed in emptying the spit valve on the back of my friend in front of me. Marching band uniforms are surprisingly absorbent. As a small child, I once attempted to put on a concert for my stuffed animals. I set them all in a group like an audience and then hopped onto my couch stage and began singing like what I understood a rock star sounded like based on some random episode of 2020 and its special report on deafness from rock and roll or whatever. A moment later, my mom comes charging into the room in panic mode, not because of my jumping around on the couch, but because she truly believed the sounds that she was hearing were me screaming in pain. What I'm getting at is that I'm not a musician, and we're all better off because of that. My admiration for people who do have those talents did lead me to eventually discover the concept of the music video, though, and that's where I finally found a medium that would allow me to participate in that world on terms I understood. So here are 2 music videos that I conceived, directed, and edited. should have an electric guitar, I insisted that he use the acoustic. It's not his fault. I'm an idiot. Like every child, I think, I was a big fan of whatever type of music my parents exposed me to. The very first favorite song I remember having was White Limousine by Dolly Parton. My parents strictly listened to country music and happened to own that album. I loved most of the songs on it and even got gifted some Dolly cassettes of my own, but White Limousine was the ultimate favorite. Finally getting to go to Dollywood not long ago was a literal dream come true. Then came the day I discovered Garth Brooks. The Thunder Rolls took the top spot the first time I heard it. So for a while, I was all about his music, collecting his cassettes, and even reading one of those cheesy, unauthorized biographies about him. I was gifted a VHS release of a few of his music videos, which made The Thunder Rolls the first music video I remember seeing. So if you had asked 9-year-old me what kind of music I liked, I would have said country music, and that was it. All other genres were garbage, never mind that I pretty much had never heard any other genres. Eventually, though, my parents decided they wanted to take their religion more seriously, and part of that change meant a shift from listening exclusively to the one country music station we could pick up to listening to the one Christian music station we could pick up. And so, contemporary Christian became my genre of choice until 6th grade, when Luke Henry of Jack and Steve Handy fame introduced me to alternative Christian music. And it was the only alternative Christian music station I could barely pick up with my makeshift radio antenna that led me to Alice Cooper. It was also that station that led me to hearing heavy metal, hardcore punk, and even rap for the first time. All Christian versions, of course, but an important exposure nonetheless. This was all a very long segue to get to talking about concerts. Until my senior year of high school, finally coming out of my antisocial shell. So the summer before my senior year, I finally went to my first real concert. Without my parents' permission or knowledge, I drove my friend Matthew and I down to the Polaris Amphitheater in Columbus to see Kansas open for Yes. We had an enjoyable time until Yes took the stage. Then we got bored and left 28 minutes into the first song. The next concert for us, well, some of you have heard yes before. The next concert for us was also my first Alice Cooper show, and the first time I went out in drag in public. Obviously, this concert had a bigger impact on me, and I could do a 2-hour show just talking about Alice, his music, and everything I've seen or done in relation to it. However, the whole point of this tangent was to get me here to the third concert I ever saw that isn't preceded by a religious description. Up until this show, every live music experience I'd had was an assigned seating affair, except the festival in a field, but here is the story of my first evening in a pit. So, you're gonna have to forgive this one. This was a piece that I wrote in high school. So it's gonna have some things that don't make sense to you, and I'm sorry. They didn't necessarily make sense to anyone then either. It seems so long ago, October 24th of the year 2000. I guess that's because it was. It was on this day that my eyes bore witness to things I'd only seen in a video, my body subjected to rigorous tortures I hadn't experienced since phys ed, and my ears bombarded by noise I hadn't heard since the drive to the event of which I am writing. It was the dawn of the day of the night of the attack of the penguins. It was the day Matthew and I went to a Guar concert. The day started like any other in the morning. I rose at 6 a.m., went to school, and then returned home. Once home, I grabbed our 2 tickets and returned to my car so that I could go pick up Matthew. We decided to stop at Meyer before heading down to the Newport Music Hall in Columbus, and it was there that I purchased my pseudo-snakeskin pants for the next concert we would be attending in 3 days. A copy of the Nightmare Before Christmas soundtrack, a 2-liter bottle of Mountain Dew, and a bag of Ruffles. Matthew purchased the same soundtrack, plus one for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, and a bag of hot fries. We were then on our way, though we were running a little behind because I left my wallet at home and had to go back there, grab it, and return to Meyer in order to pay for the aforementioned item which I had left at the register for safekeeping. Lateness aside, we were still on our way. We arrived at the parking garage across the street from the Newport at about 7:15. Concert was set to begin at 7, so we were on time. Little did we know they wouldn't open the doors until 20 after. While waiting in line, I was told by some fella in charge that I had to remove my spiked collar and bracelets. I complied and put them in my pocket. A few moments after this, the line finally began to move. Once the line got going, there was no stopping because we were being ushered in like cattle as quickly as possible. We were finally permitted to adjust our movements individually upon exiting the hallway. It was there that we came across the merchandise booth filled with Guar memorabilia. This quaint little booth was run by a quaint little man whose red hair was dyed to match the 2 red crystal spikes protruding from his nose. It was from this jovial fellow that I purchased a hooded sweatshirt and a bumper sticker. Matthew, of course, bummed money from me to buy himself a bumper sticker. The hooded sweatshirt wasn't the best of purchases because I was already warm in the 2 shirts I had arrived in. Nevertheless, I put it on and got warmer. Matthew and I sort of stood around for a while, absorbing the atmosphere of the place. Behind was the room with the booth. To either side of us were bars of the alcoholic sort for those persons with wristbands designating them 21 or older, and in front of us lay the pit. The pit was a large square area in front of the stage, about 2 feet below the main floor level, and was surrounded by metal guardrails. Outside of the pit were tables and benches for the barflies. Time had passed and the stage still lacked musicians, so we turned around and lo and behold, who stood before us? None other than our occasional amigo Kevin. He was there with some folks with whom we were unfamiliar, but it mattered not because Kevin was present. We spoke for a while, shocked that there was another person from Mount Gilead who was familiar with the artistic endeavors of Guar. As time marched on like the cold machine that it is, we too marched forth to the stairs leading down to the main floor from the bar area. It was there that we remained for a long time. At about 8 o'clock, the opening act to the opening act finally began their set. The lights had all but turned off. The audience had quieted. The music was beginning and fog was filling the stage. Fog continued to fill the stage as the band came forth. From the fog there emerged a man in red pajamas, a red hooded cloak with devil horns, and a clown nose on his face. Who was this costumed abomination? He He was none other than the lead singer for Devil Cake, perhaps the worst band to ever grace a stage. I'm convinced the only reason they were up there was because they had a life debt to the owner of the Newport for defacing his property, and as their punishment were forced to form a band and perform in front of violent audiences. It happens. All of their songs revolved around the same concepts: fast food and Satanism. A fine example is their song entitled Chicken Nuggets of Sin. Their big gimmick, aside from the fog, was to throw donuts and marshmallows into the crowd. This must have been part of their punishment as well, because the foodstuffs provided ample ammunition for the audience members to pelt the band with. There were also the more common jeers, boos, and get the fuck off the stages. Yet Devil Cake persisted, somehow finishing their set, and were probably beaten to death upon exiting the building. Next, for our viewing pleasure, was Lamb of God. The highlight of their act was not being Devil Cake. Other than that, they aren't really worth mentioning. By the end of the second band set, we had moved into the pit and were awaiting the arrival of Guar. And arrive they did. After a 30-minute intermission to set up the stage, the lights dimmed a third time, and the crowd in the pit charged forth to get as close as possible to the band. Matthew and I were in such a position that we were swept forward with the flow. Once all had settled and the opening scene began, I had a moment to see that Matthew and I were separated, and I was about 5 people from the stage. The opening scene was Guar's interpretation of the recent presidential debate. On the stage, there were 2 men in suits that came up to just above their heads. Upon their heads were fake heads resembling those that belonged to Al Gore and George W. Bush. Each gave a little soliloquy about how they were going to rob us of our money. Upon the completion of their respective speeches, the announcer announced the arrival of a third candidate, Guar's manager, Sleazy P. Martini. He was a tallish man with large plastic hair, wearing a large rubber suit. He proceeded to give his speech, and the pit was filled with cheers. He suggested we just vote for president right there. So we did. And of course, Sleazy won. As his first official act as unofficial president of the U.S., he lowered the gun that had been resting on his shoulder and pressed it against Al Gore's big fake head. Sleazy pulled the trigger, Al's head exploded, the blood shot forth, and so did the crowd. Our first motion was one last thrust forward towards the stage as a whole, and then chaos broke out. I wouldn't call what went on dancing. It was more like random acts of violence in the forms of hitting, slamming, jumping, bouncing, ramming, jamming, shoving, and good old-fashioned beating. I, for one, didn't know this was coming and was literally swallowed by the mass. It took quite a bit of effort to fight my way to just behind the moshers. I then took a moment to collect myself. That moment was brief, because when I looked up to admire the stage, I was greeted with a blast of blood in the face. It was then that I snapped out of my stupor and leapt forward into the throng. I was bombarded on all sides by folks who knew the jig, and so I struck back. Anarchy reigned in that pit, and it was bliss. The concert was very similar to this from then on. Subtle differences included variations on which bodily fluids we were doused with, and at the end of the concert, women were brought onto the stage and fed to the giant world maggot that lived under the drum set. After effects included red, orange, and yellow hair, stained clothing, a contact buzz, and many bruises. All in all, this concert was just a concert, and yet, it was an experience I will not soon forget. You're going to enjoy like another minute of this because I was supposed to be spraying the audience, but nobody wanted, you pussies didn't want to sit in the splash zone, so you ruined the bit. Each one of you are all personally responsible for it. So enjoy. wasn't done with that page. Anybody familiar with Guar would probably agree that their personas and stage show are sort of a mashup of pro wrestling and comic books, which is handy for me because it works as a segue into my next topic. My very first comic book was Fantastic Four issue 359, and I got it on a whim from a newsstand in a mall when it was new and I was 8. I had no idea what was going on in the story, but the characters and the art were captivating, so I just kept rereading it until I made my own sense out of it. Now I'm done with that page. Then I discovered there were places in my hometown that sold these comic book things. Next visit to Kroger we made, I snapped up the newest issue of Amazing Spider-Man. Then my mom got me a subscription to it, and the mailman started bringing comics to me. Learning about mail order catalogs and comic book stores were also game changers. As I read these comics and learned about the characters and absorbed the stories, I also got my first bits of regular exposure to art. Mark Bagley was my first art hero, and that was at least partly because my dad took me to meet him at a signing event at a local comic shop. I had him sign that first issue of Amazing Spider-Man I'd gotten, and I remember him trying to talk me into having him sign something else because he was afraid his signature would devalue the comic itself. Around that same time, I decided to experiment with drawing as a hobby. The very first thing I drew was the Velociraptor from a McDonald's Collector's Cup, and I impressed myself with how good I considered it to be. I decided that when I grew up, I was going to attend Joe Schubert's School of Comic Art and then move to New York to live in drawings were planned of potential costume ideas, and anytime my dad needed to travel to the Army surplus store, I tagged along to get ideas and dream about the various items sold there and their possible use in crime fighting. I would even sneak out of my house at night to wander around on a roof and to ride my bike through the ghost town that we lived in for practice. And those were my dreams until junior high. My dreams until I met other kids who also loved comic books and not only loved to draw, but were way, way better at it than me. My dreams until I took my first art class with a teacher who probably believed herself to be being constructive critically, but I just felt like every project was a failure. My dreams until I had to do actual weightlifting and wrestling in phys ed and learn just how not cut out for that sort of physical activity my body was. My dreams that I finally let die my sophomore year of high school when that same junior high art teacher flunked me in Art 2. While I gave up on my dream of being a comic book artist by day and real-life superhero by night, thanks to filmmaking, I did eventually infiltrate the world of superheroes.
Hello, and welcome to an all-new episode of Suburban Heroes. I'm your host, Jack, but most of my fans know me better as Captain Pain. Today, we're standing in front of one of the most dangerous things the world has ever seen. A portal.
See, I'm disappointed now. I mean, I'm part of something special. I've been part of a super team before.
Aren't you a little upset that your physics teacher sent you here for trials just to distract you long enough to steal your super speed formula while you were gone?
No. Not at all.
Tonight, the Freedom League of Justice Fighters is facing our toughest challenge yet. Now we're coming to you from a mysterious
We're in Howell, Michigan.
Seriously. Why? Okay, let's try this again on me. Because right now, we're standing in front of one of the most... Not now, Billy.
I don't know, maybe.
Of course this is it! Did you guys see any other interdimensional demon portals on the way over here?
No.
I wasn't really looking.
Jesus Christ, this is the exact same portal we saw in the news. Demons have been pouring out of this thing and terrorizing the city.
Suburbs.
Not now, Billy.
They're not going out now.
I swear to God, Hunter. I swear to God! Alright, you know what? Justice Fighters, form up. Form up. Okay, we need to stop this thing before those goddamn Arios swoop in again and steal all our credit.
The Arios.
Yeah, that national super group out of Philly. Bunch of goddamn glory hogs.
How do we stop that?
The Aerials?
No, the demons.
Oh, right. Okay, first, we need to close the portal. Because closing the portal will render the demons powerless.
Okay, but...
Wait. Why would closing the portal render them powerless?
What?
I mean, wouldn't they just trap them here with us?
What?
How do you know that closing the portal would fix this?
It just will, okay?
But this portal...
No, there's no... You close the fucking portal, Hunter, the demon can die. That's how it always works. God damn it.
So you dealt with this sort of thing before, right?
Obviously.
Not really.
What?
Okay, not this kind of portal exactly, but we've seen portals before, so it's almost the same thing.
In movies, maybe.
What?
Okay, we may have only seen portals in movies before, but we've seen a lot of movies, and it's almost the same thing.
Which movies? Ow.
We're in a garage, it's Sub-Zero. Demons are coming out of our portal, man. Get that shit.
So how do we close it?
Well, this is just a thought, but what if we,
Whoa, dude. You never touch a portal from behind, jackass. It'll fry your limbs off.
Really?
You're actually thinking Stargate.
No, I'm not. Ooh, I think I might actually be thinking Stargate.
Sure.
Boom, idea, Hunter. We saw that device from the,
No, we sold that at the last garage sale, remember? We, only work on zombies, not demons.
Shit, I think he's right. So, the aerials are definitely coming. That's for sure.
According to the news, yeah.
I mean,
Okay, then.
maybe this isn't exactly the perfect situation I envisioned for myself. But then again, nothing in life is perfect. Besides, I'm in a position where I can really help people. And I think that's the important thing. And I get to learn from the best.
Okay, form up. Here's the play. We let the aerials have this one. And we take the next one. The next what? The next portal? Yeah, because honestly, between demons, aliens, mages, some jackass is always trying to open a portal. Trust me, there's gonna be a ton more of these things. So, before the aerials get in, maybe we could go. Because honestly, I'm not even sure who sat that damn thing in the front. Oh shit.
Speed.
This might be looking. Kill it!
And so we arrive at the big medium in my life, movies. My first favorite movie I remember watching was Poltergeist. It was one of a handful of films on a home video format that my parents owned. I also recall them having The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas and The Empire Strikes Back. Supposedly they had more, but I don't remember what. For the first 30 years of my life, I believed we had these films on Laserdisc. It was only relatively recently that I learned the large flat plastic objects were CEDs, a format that attempted to rival Laserdisc, but like my attempts at art, failed. I've come to realize many of what I thought were cutting-edge electronics we owned had a similar odd lots bargain bin origin. Much of my life has been a lie of my own fabrication, not because of trauma or grandiose aspirations, but merely because I never bothered to say, hey, what actually is this thing and where did it come from? So, yeah, movies. Like I mentioned before, my childhood entertainment largely revolved around TV and comic books. Bonus points if the two were related. Movies were fine, but if we went to the video store and I wasn't planning to rent Gremlins 2 or Howard the Duck for the 18th time, then I was likely more interested in the video game section. We did occasionally go to the movie theater whenever a new family film or a Hulk Hogan movie came out, but film was sort of a background diversion for me. As is often the case, that changed in high school. The summer before 9th grade was largely spent hanging out with my new best friend, Matthew. Matthew was a huge movie nerd who grew up being allowed to watch whatever he wanted. I was the opposite, but still interested in many of the other same things that he was into. So I introduced him to alternative Christian music that he mostly made fun of, and he introduced me to Killer Clowns from Outer Space, Halloween, and The Toxic Avenger. We spent most of that summer riding our bikes to the video store and back, renting stacks of VHS and returning them the next day so we could get more. That summer, I also began dating my first serious girlfriend. This naturally led to having my heart broken for the first time about 7 months later. Since it had become routine, I chose to console myself by renting some movies. I rented 2 movies that Valentine's night, but the one that stood out and changed my life was Joe Dante's masterpiece, The Burbs. Despite my high school heartache and early signs of later diagnosed major depression, The Burbs completely transported me through the hijinks and hilarity of Tom Hanks and his neighbors in Hinckley Hills. For those 90 minutes or so, I completely forgot about my sadness and teenage ennui. That was the night I truly understood the power of film as an immersive medium. From then on, if I wasn't hanging out at the video store doing the clerk's job for free by straightening shelves and putting the returned rentals back out, I was watching movies at home or watching a movie at the local theater. When I joined the school newspaper that year, it was as the film critic, and of course, since I was hanging out at the theater and video store all the time, I was constantly bugging the managers to let me work there. Much like when I asked out 2 of the employees at the video store, I was repeatedly declined. Despite this new passion for movies, I still hadn't considered filmmaking as an interest. That idea didn't really come about until after I learned what video editing was. One day in English class, we were assigned the task of splitting into groups and filming our own version of a scene from To Kill a Mockingbird. Well, nobody really had any idea on how to write a script, and we weren't super keen on memorization, obviously. So what we settled on was to pantomime the action while an off-screen narrator read the corresponding scene directly from the book. Everything went super easy, and since we used my parents' camcorder, I took the tape home only to discover part of what we shot was garbled because we used a really worn-out tape. Still being lazy, we only wanted to reshoot the missing scenes. Again, since it was my parents' camcorder, it was left to me to figure out how to put the new footage in the right place with the old footage. Remembering how my dad had once made a copy of some home video for a relative by connecting the camcorder to the VCR like a second VCR and pressing record and play on the correct devices, I successfully edited my first film. We received a good grade and a little note of praise for the video because of our use of editing rather than the standard high school video technique of the time, which was to simply set up the camera on a tripod and act everything out like a play. And that was the germ that got me into the world of filmmaking. Once that was combined with reading Lloyd Kaufman's book, everything